welcome to all of you joining us today for the Catalysing Fashion Change panel discussion for the 2021 virtual Women of the World Festival Karachi. I'm really pleased to be moderating the discussion today. My name is Kendall Robbins, and I'm a cultural manager working in the fields of fashion, craft, and design. But I'm also currently a student nurse at King's College London. I'm going to start us off today with some opening remarks and then invite our panelists to introduce themselves before we go ahead and start the discussion. I was actually really privileged to attend WOW Karachi in December 2019, where I presented my thoughts on fashion, gender equality, and climate change as a speaker. So being back here today, chairing this discussion feels like it's really coming full circle. Obviously, though, a lot has changed since December 2019. And when I came to Karachi last time, I was still working for the British Council in the UK as a global program manager for crafts in the architecture, design and fashion department there, where I'd been working for about 10 years. And since that visit, I've left the British Council, in part because actually I was ethically struggling to continue working with fashion and craft. Maybe we'll hear about that later, but also because I think I'd become increasingly interested in these kind of wider concepts of care and empathy. And that's kind of what has led me to nursing. Beyond me, though, of course, shortly after that visit to Karachi, a bigger global thing started, the pandemic. And the theme of WOW Karachi this year is kind of reflecting this through the concept of unmask. So while the pandemic has masked us, it has also unmasked a range of social and environmental issues that are particularly significant to women and girls. At the same time, this has actually been a really big year of achievements for women. And the festival theme aims to explore this through three lenses, which include reclaiming, so looking at healing, listening, and recovering; reframing, which calls for taking ownership of conversations, spaces, and movements for change; and refashioning, which is about imagining a better post-pandemic world. So through this panel, we're going to explore these three themes by discussing sustainable fashion, the sustainable fashion movement as a feminist response. So I'm hoping everyone who's joined to watch this has joined because maybe you already know about fashion's impact on women and climate, and you want to hear about change and kind of some of the things that are happening. However, if this is a new topic for you, I do want to take the opportunity to highlight a few facts and figures to give that context. So firstly, why do we need to talk about women and climate together? So just a few reasons. Women and children are 14 times more likely to die during natural disasters or during disasters generally. During this time, gender-based violence spikes in the aftermath of disasters. Women are more likely to starve so that their families can eat. Gender inequality in technology and clean tech mean that we're actually not maximizing brain power that's there and efforts in order to combat climate change. And underneath all of this, only 12% of federal environmental ministries are headed by women. So women have very little political power around these issues. And I think, looking at that, you see kind of women are disproportionately affected by environmental challenges. But due to these inequalities, they're also not able to address them with full force. So kind of relating this back to fashion, I'm going to give a few statistics as well about how fashion's impact is then intertwined with both gender and climate. So in China, female garment factory workers can face up to 150 hours of overtime a month, with 60% of those having no contract and 90% having no social insurance. Clothes and textiles are the #1 source of microplastics in our oceans. In Bangladesh, a garment factory worker earns just 8,972 rupees a month, which is only a quarter of the living wage. A t-shirt takes the same amount of water to make as we each drink over 3 years. The amount of CO2 produced per household per year on clothes is the same as driving 6,000 cars. A garment is worn on average just 4 times, and we make 400 billion meters of textiles annually, with 60 billion that ends up in the trash before being even made into clothing. So I think kind of considering all this, we can kind of see how actually it's our relationship with fashion and clothing that's leaving us kind of swimming in textile waste, turning grasslands into deserts, polluting life-giving waterways, and in some instances actually killing workers. Women are the most involved and the most exploited in fashion production, and yet women at the same time are the ones most affected by fashion's impact on climate. And in both instances, they're often without a voice in that discussion. So kind of thinking about change, a lot of this reminds me of the 1970s and 1980s when the concept of eco-feminism began to appear. This theory suggests that women and nature are both oppressed and treated as property, and that structures like labor, power, and property are used to dominate both women and nature. But this was mirrored at the same time by female-led environmental movements of the time. So things like the Greenbelt movement in Kenya or the Chipko movement in India to stop deforestation. And in fashion as well, there's a long history of women fighting for their rights, all the way back to the labor movements of the early garment factories of the 19th and 20th centuries. Today, we're also going to be talking about craft's role in this. I think craft is often offered up as an alternative to industrialized fashion because it's seen as a kind of slower process which consumes less. It teaches us to have deep and meaningful relationships with material objects. To me, this is the same aim as the arts and crafts movement in the UK in the 1800s, which was also something that was responsive to industrialization. And it called for the return to kind of simple, locally based lifestyles that focused on craft as a means for a better environment, but also social health and equality for women. So I do believe that gender equality is necessary to combat the global climate emergency. And fashion and clothing are things which affect everyone every day as something that we all need and use. And I think in this way that it can be a kind of entry point to a much bigger conversation about how we can all, as societies globally and as individuals, come together to address inequalities in gender and in climate and actually shape a future together. So today, I'm really pleased to be joined by a fantastic international panel. I'm in London, I don't think I mentioned that, in the UK, and we've got speakers from across quite a few time zones. And we have expertise from across craft, fashion, manufacturing, sustainability, education, and design. So really kind of big breadth of experience. And we're going to be looking at this overlap between fashion, gender equality, and climate change. And we're going to ask this question: how can we catalyze fashion change? So that's enough from me. So I want to go ahead and begin by asking the panelists to first introduce themselves and say a few words about what they do. So if we could go ahead and get started with Sudebi, please.
Hi. It's my privilege and honor to be a part of this today. I was saying I'm pretty nervous looking at, everybody over here and your range of work and the depth of the work that you bring in. I like to call myself a narrative designer, a creative facilitator, and an interweaver. Why I use the word interweaver, it's not like I'm into weaving, but I use weaving as a metaphor. I try to interweave different kinds of elements into my work. I like to design experiences, engagement, and environment that allow people to think, to have discourses and dialogues, to make their thinking and interaction visible, and through this, enabling them to design their own solutions and narratives using different kinds of modes and media. Having said that, I have been teaching at one of the oldest design schools in India, Srishti Manipal Institute of Art Design and Technology. I also have co-founded my own design-led collective called D Epicenter, along with my co-founder Probal. And there are 5 or 6 different interconnected elements that we bring into our work: storytelling, learning and pedagogy, systems thinking, rather complex systems thinking, design as an approach, and inclusion. And through that, we design a lot of inquiry-based work across the globe. And I mean, in all the work that I do, I feel today in this panel with the broader theme of unmask, I would really like to unmask a lot of different facets with everyone together.
Thanks so much, Debbie. It's very exciting to have you. Can I go ahead and ask Noorjehan to introduce herself?
Hello, everyone. Great to be here, and really is an honor to be part of this group panel. I wish I could say all that should be said. I'm basically simply a learner, and it's constantly at every step. And I'm really, really old. I can see the huge generation gap here. But even now, I just feel every few days, months, there's something new that crops up. So I'm constantly trying to learn and trying to see where I am. I studied painting. It was by chance that I got involved into textiles. It's become part and parcel of an internal, integral part of my life. But when I think and reflect now, why and how did textiles come in? I actually, till I was 9 years old, I was in Hyderabad, Dakkan, in India. And now that when I think of it, I was surrounded totally by textiles and this city of culture, heritage, the rich, rich colors around me of fuchsias, saffron, the emerald greens, purples, golds. Also, you saw the women wearing cotton saris with those amazing combinations. The silks were jewels and treasures. And I think that just got ingrained into me. And that's how I came here, and then continued with my mother. Then we moved to Pakistan, my mother carrying her what we call potlies, that are really bundles. And you be constantly, like twice a year, Karachi is very humid, and so textiles have to be cared for. So we would open these bundles and pull out these old, precious textiles that belonged to my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and refold them, air them, and put them back. And I was soaking in all of this. And all the time we would be pulling out something that could be just altered slightly to be worn and used. So this thing of being used and reused and recycled, and fabric being there forever, and then growing up with uncut 6-yard fabric, which was there, relevant through all the generations. So the word fashion is something that I sort of move back, and I feel it's really not part of my vocabulary that I grew up with. So those are questions that I need to bring in at some point in some forum, that what are we doing, where are we, what was our context, how are we pushed into this, and why are we sort of claiming to say that we are reclaiming what has been a continuous part of our life. Even when documenting or doing any craft, documentation, or textile, I can still go and find old scraps of ajrak behind a ralli, which is being used in homes. So, and then, as growing up, I learned tailoring because my mother sewed my clothes. Then I continued to do that for my daughters. Tailors came in much later in our lives. And it was always utilizing the smallest scrap of cloth. It was put into bundles, reused and reused. And it got into my thing that later, when I got into textiles, if I had to do a fashion show, I would begin with little strips of cloth, and everybody around me would laugh, "What are you doing?" And my colors, combination, textures, patterns, everything came out from these scraps. So, this has been part of our existence here. And so I'm basically, whatever comes my way, I try to learn more about it. And I think it's lovely to be here. I don't know what to say more about it. I'd move on as we go. Yeah,
That's great. Thank you very much for that. I love the way that you've described the kind of care with textiles. I have to admit, I'm American, and the idea of the scraps reminds me of the country singer Dolly Parton and her song "The Code of Many Colors," where she describes the kind of same thing of gathering all the scraps and using them. So that's really lovely. Thank you. Shahzada, could I go ahead and ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, yes. It's definitely an honor for me to be part of such a diverse panel from across the globe, and I really look forward to expressing my views as I am associated with the manufacturing industry. So the inspiration for me actually started from home. My mother, she was all into crafts, and she's a master into embroideries and knitting, and she used to stitch our clothes at home, and then do the draping part, the pattern fittings with us, and then make all those traditional cultural clothes for us. So that's how my inspiration got evolved from here. And then I did my professional degree in design from Pakistan School of Fashion Design here in Lahore. And then from there onwards, I joined the export sector, the textile manufacturing industry in Pakistan, exclusively the denim part. So I belong to the denim industry. Currently working as the design lead in Crescent Bahuman, which is a vertical denim manufacturing setup. And previously, I've worked for different denim suppliers who manufacture different products like bottoms, jeans, and jackets for all the international brands, and then we export all these to the destined countries. So my experience is all with denim, the denim fabric, the fits, the fascinating, the culottes, the skinnies, and then the finishing part, which is like all the fascinating vintage aging of denim. So I am associated at the manufacturers end, and we work for like all these brands. We do make our seasonal collections, work on different concepts, sustainable solutions, and we offer to our customers. Then we work in close coordination with all the international designers, either from customer side or independent freelancers as well. So we keep learning from their sustainable practices, diverse experiences, and yeah, that's my part. So currently working for the denim sector.
Thank you very much. I liked your list of all of the ways that denim can be used. I kind of think, wow, there really are so many kind of garments out there and types and everything. Very great. Could I go ahead and ask finally Claire to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you so much. How to follow that, because I loved so much the stories of connection that all of you, each one of you, had a different story about this very, I think, universal connection to textiles and garments. They're like these holders of memory, aren't they? There's something very personal about fashion and textiles. I come at this from a completely different perspective. I'm a journalist. I'm a writer. I now actually have to rethink how I describe myself, because I'm mostly a podcaster. So having spent maybe close to 2 decades in fashion magazines, I now focus on my own platform. It's called Wardrobe Crisis. I'm still a journalist, but I like to use the word storyteller. I'm not really an investigative journalist. I'm a storyteller, so I collect stories. I see myself not as the expert, but as a conduit to be able to bring people together so that the audience can listen to stories from the people who've got this wonderful, fascinating expertise. So I'm delighted to hear from all of you about your textile stories and expertise. I present a podcast called Wardrobe Crisis. It's based on my book of the same name, which came out ages ago now, 2016. And it's subtitled How We Went from Sunday Best to Fast Fashion. And I think that subtitle is really important. It basically tells the story of how we lost that connection that used to be, or how so many of us, not all of us, but how so many people have lost that connection that used to be so deep with how our clothes are made and the many hands that have made them and the beauty of the stories. And so I guess I'm based in Sydney, but I'm British. I come from a kind of perspective of, I used to work at Vogue. I was the first Vogue sustainability editor. So I spent years selling people the dream of fashion without taking enough time to talk about what formed the dream and the processes behind the clothes that we were selling. I had an epiphany. It happened over Rana Plaza. It was 2013. Obviously, everyone is aware of that devastating and enormous in scale garment factory disaster that happened in Dhaka in Bangladesh. That to me was a wake-up call. I decided to change my career and focus on sustainability. So that's what I do. My most recent book it's called Rise and Resist, How to Change the World, and it's about activism. And within that, I do tell quite a lot of stories about craft and how we can potentially use fashion as a change-making, I don't know if the word's tool, but I like this idea of, this is how I'll end. I like this idea of fashion as a soft entry to difficult conversations. I think that we can use it to connect and broach difficult conversations about feminism, equality, equity, social justice, climate. And I think that fashion has huge power in that it can be quite an inviting way in. So that's me. And I'm just absolutely thrilled to be part of this. So thank you very much for letting me join you.
Thanks so much, Claire. I think Rana Plaza, was a huge wake-up call for so many people. I know I personally grew up in rural America sewing competitively, as you do there apparently, and so I had an awareness of how clothing was made, but kind of never really struck me, even working in fashion, and as a historian of fashion, that was kind of what was happening today, and I think it's great to hear your story and how kind of the path that you're on now. I think I really identify with that personally as well. So it's great to meet all of you properly. I think we'll go ahead and kick off then. We have about 45 minutes to kind of go through some of these themes. I wanted to start first with the theme of reclaiming, which again is talking about healing, listening and recovering. And I want to go ahead and start with a question to Noorjehan. I know that, a huge part of your work as, someone working in textiles has been based around kind of reclaiming and recovering some of Pakistan's craft heritage. And I, reading about you, I know that this has included kind of the revival of natural dyes like indigo, handloom, textiles, block printing. And I think as well that, it's to me, this kind of restoration of traditional knowledge in many ways is a kind of decolonization, but it also offers a kind of potentially more sustainable material culture. So it's really exciting. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about this process of reclaiming and recovering textile craft and how you think it's created positive change in Pakistan.
Kendall, that's a very tough question because I don't think I've approached anything with the idea that I am reclaiming. And like I said earlier, that it's always been learning, and whatever has happened inadvertently, or it's just happened. It's basically a kind of a curiosity to know what is this, and then it leads into discovering the process, because nothing is made or nothing happens without a process, and that has the history and endless evolving through generations. So I think my connection first started, as I said, in textiles, primarily in understanding what block printing is, and I had no clue because I was a student of fine arts in my own studio and meeting a different kind of people, and of course interested but not knowing anything about textiles, except, like I said earlier, that I grew up in textiles without knowing how they are being produced, how they're being made, but you are saturated with, and I think everyone in the subcontinent generally is, it's part and parcel of our lives. So it was the block printing that I just happened to come across. I was doing some interior designing and I saw this person printing because I never looked at it in schools. Now it's part of everything being taught. So to me, as an artist, the whole process was fascinating. How with the wooden block, a color can be used, and the umpteen possibilities in creating, and that's how I got drawn into it, and then learned that Karachi was pre-partition was the main center where block printing used to be done and spread all over the subcontinent, right up to Dhaka and India. And sadly, when we talk about what colonization has done to the subcontinent, similarly, partition did that as well. A lot of crafts were affected, and therefore the production that was happening here, because the wearers were people wore saris, and that was what was being printed here and sent all over, that activity ceased. So the people had just thrown away the blocks upstairs, but they hadn't thrown them away. They kept them away into dusty corners, and they became bakers or electricians, and that whole craft was kind of gone from here. Till I just encountered in a small little shop where they were printing small tablecloths, and was fascinated, and searched more and more and discovered there's this whole community that existed, have not been doing it. And that is how it sort of got me going, and started block printing, brought it back into it. My visits to India, and I saw that it was being sustained there, also informed me and could apply. And it's there, I mean, very much part of my life. I mean, Koel started off, and then block printing, from block printing. So I don't know how I reclaimed, I learned, as I said, and now we've got, it's part of every area. You'll find block printers, dyers, printers, block makers. So this whole community, the chain cycle, is back into action by that little curiosity. And I think if we are just aware of what we have around us and learn a bit more about it, and make it part of our present life without altering too much, but having that understanding about the process. For me, the most important thing is understanding the process. Similarly, ajrak was a fabric, one just associated with the interior Sindh, that people wore turbans, or you saw them in the old bazaar in Karachi, had no idea, never even thought about it, what it is, till I saw the different stages of ajrak at a mela in Islamabad, for the place, not Karachi. And I was fascinated. I said, what is this? And they said, this is how ajrak is made. And to arrive at the indigo madder end result of the, resistant modern tint fabric, went through 20 different stages, all using the river. And that's how, for thousands of years, goes back to Mohenjo-daro, as they claim, that this fabric was made. So I visited all of the areas, realized that nobody knew about it, and I started documenting it. And I was so fascinated. Again, it was learning. So it was a very selfish desire to know more about what it is, and being blown over with how indigenous material can fashion, as we say, fashion something so beautiful, which we didn't even know, I didn't know existed. So, and then I tried to sort of stop it at different stages, tried to see how I can make that, and sort of documentary film, book, documenting the people, bringing it back into the urban area, making it, trying it out on different kind of fabrics, but literally to see what it was. I had to go into the interior, like I said earlier, turn around rallies to find old pieces, because it was such a common fabric that the museums didn't have it. So this is how it was. And again, it was through ajrak, because we're so short of time. My stories are too long, and I'm not even showing the visuals. But while I was doing ajrak, documenting one of my printers in Tandum Alayar, very sheepishly told me, Bibi, I won't speak in Urdu, but I'm using indigo, the natural indigo, because it's cheaper, and I mix it with the chemical indigo. The process remained the same as they did for using natural dyes, but the chemical dyes had gone through in the process following that. I think there's some, okay, anyway. So anyway, if I take too much time, I can just close this here and then move on at another time. But I learned all about indigo through one person because he was feeling sheepish about using it. And I said, oh, you're a treasure. You've kept this alive. And I found the indigo plant, which used to grow wild on the banks of Indus River, as something that was still continued to be grown, because they would use the leaves of the indigo plant as black henna to send it to the Middle East, but not as indigo as a dye. So then I went through the entire process of making the natural indigo, and we planted in Miani forest and went through the traditional method. I'm probably speaking too much.
Thank you for that. No, there's so much there to kind of unpack. I think maybe the term is better about to describe it as like recovering some of this heritage, the way you've kind of described discovering it and kind of going on that journey of learning. I think I like the sheepishly using the natural indigo. I think, there's a lot of places that's still happening, kind of people are kind of don't see the sort of power. But I think, it's an incredible story of, and to see how much it's kind of helped to re-elevate craft within culture, particularly as you kind of point out post-partition. It's, seems like a really, really important journey. I think kind of leading on to that actually fits quite nicely with my question to Sudebi, because you're also working in kind of craft. And I know that in your practice as a kind of narrative designer that you talked about inquiry and kind of oral history and narratives. And I kind of was wondering then, under this kind of theme of reclaiming and recovering, how you actually use listening as a kind of means to potentially catalyze craft, or we'll say fashion as well, change.
Thank you, Kendall. I mean, I wish I could keep hearing to Noorjehan. I mean, I was so fascinated by the stories, and it sort of took me back to my childhood because I feel like my connection with fabric and my connection with textiles is very, what would I say? It's very tactile. I can almost feel my grandmother. She's not there anymore, but I can feel her through the feeling of the fabric that I would get, when I would embrace her. And every person in my life, I think, who are dear to me, I can feel them through the fabric that they wear, the smell, how it feels. And I totally agree with Noorjehan. I think my biggest, identity, or whatever I might call it, is to really learn. And learning cannot happen without unlearning. And one of the things that I do, it's not just that I work in the crafts the way in which most of our panelists here do, but by virtue of being a design educator and an art educator, it gives me an opportunity two ways. One is to take the future designers, future artists, future arts managers and cultural practitioners, to take them through a process of unlearning by really immersing in the fields of crafts and artists and communities. The other thing is to understand the subcontinent and the different layers of complexities and beauties that it offers through the actual practitioners, because one of the things that I feel happens a lot is on one hand, there is complete unawareness. Most people have lost that touch with the past, the heritage, the legacy, and these interconnections. On the other hand, you will also find people, and designers are also a part of that, or designers or people like NGOs who work in the craft revival and other things, where their role becomes that of an interventionalist, and that comes with a power. And the power dynamics and the politics of it. And I very often question that. One of the things that I feel that colonization does, and I'm not again using colonization in a socio-political way, I'm even talking about it philosophically. Sometimes, even if we are in a so-called decolonized space, the colonization is actually in the mind. And I feel one of the things that colonization does is it completely disconnects you from yourself. So this reconnection with the self is what I feel is what one should do, by first listening to yourself, listening to what's inside and seeing what's inside. Because if you can't do that, you cannot do that to the others. And I feel that, some of the damages that current education does, and in the subcontinent, the education that we are all a part of, the systems of education that we are a part of, knowingly, unknowingly, they're influenced by different kinds of colonization. And what happens in that process is, one, we start looking at the world in binaries. It's always about good versus bad, me versus you, us versus them. And that's a very problematic space to be. It kind of makes us very impatient, very intolerant, not believing in plurality. And coming from a country like India, when I have my own interests in knowing about the country and everything around it, I feel that the fabric of our country is in the acceptance of all the different voices, all the different threads, everything that's out there. And sometimes these threads are contrasting. I mean, there might be a thread in a piece of fabric that I might not connect to or I might not like. That doesn't mean that I can deny that, right? And that's one kind of colonization. The other kind of colonization that happens, and I believe that spending time in pausing actually opens up possibilities. I sometimes like calling it the pauseability. So a pause that allows for those possibilities to come. And I feel that it helps in understanding. For example, we grow up with a very strange notion of the survival of the fittest. And it's a very strange kind of notion. That kind of leads to, again, a very strong misconception about anything which is slow is bad. You look at our systems of schooling, the word slow, tell me one instance where the word slow has been used in a good way. Never. You are a slow learner. You are being very slow. Speed up, fast and fast and fast, right? So how are we going to come out of that system and believe in listening to something which is slow? I mean, I was remembering my grandmom, and I'm remembering my mother who's there, and most of my memories in my childhood about fabric, I'm bringing it back. There was no concept of old. It's always old versus new, and again old and new. You know why? Because my mom would have a piece of fabric which she actually inherited from her grandmom. Then she would keep on using it, and the scraps and all of that. Then, I mean, I stay in Bangalore, but I come from a state called Bengal, West Bengal. And we would have our own kantha. When I was a child, different layers of saris and old, like tattered clothes, though those would be stitched together to create a quilt. And I would be lying on that, right? Then, even if I could not use it anymore, it would have been passed down to somebody else. When they could not use it anymore, the threads would be taken out and some other rug would come out, right? So would you call the rug a new one or an old one? And none of these people knew about circular economics. They did not call themselves designers. They did not have the word fashion. And I mean, I can't help but narrate a story because I love stories as well. I think when we were children, the word fashion wasn't very existent, except for fashion TV, which most of us were banned from watching, right? The word that you would hear about would be style. And I'd like to bring our attention to the meaning-wise differentiation of fashion and style. And it sort of hit me hard when I think it was in my middle school when I read Rabindranath Tagore's Shesher Kobita, which is Farewell Song, a beautiful novel. It's a very progressive, controversial, and a very pragmatic and what would I say, liberating novel where there are two main characters, Amit Ray and Lavanya. And if you see their discourses, these are two lovers who decide to part their ways. And this character, the woman, is one of the most progressive women characters you would ever come across. She is someone who makes her own choices. She lives by them. She believes that she cannot lose her own identity, even in a very intense relationship. Now, why I'm talking about this is, in this particular novel, Amit Ray, the protagonist, one of the protagonists, talks about fashion, saying fashion is like a mask, and style is the features of a face, the beauty of countenance, And he talks about how there is such lack of appreciation in our country for style, because style, in a way, is original, right? fashion is not timeless. It changes. It's trendy, and those who follow and base their trade on the approval of others in a way follow fashion. And in this part of the novel where he talks about how he differentiates between fashion and style, he also it ends by saying that a person who's listening to this discourse is saying, there is this lady who's not so well educated. She is actually understanding this guy and what he's trying to say. And then the author actually ends by that paragraph by saying, women are very strange. They have such amazing common sense. This very erudite, well-educated person, what he is saying, she lives by that, right? And I thought of bringing that conversation again, that one connects, the other one distracts. One talks about what is external, connection with the external. The other one is the connection with the internal. And I believe that even as designers, the choices that people make should not just be informed, they should be intuitive. They should not just be driven by, I think this is right. It shouldn't come from an egocentric space, but an ecocentric space. And that only happens when we delve into the space which is in between being apathetic, being unaware, on the other hand, being very ideal and using fads. And that only happens when you learn to learn from experiences. You learn to see experiential perspectives. You learn to listen to the lived narratives of people. And that is decolonization for me. And I feel that only then, even without using the terms fashion and style, people will be able to see for themselves where exactly is the connection between fashion, sustainability, climate change, gender. Because there are stories and tons of stories all around us. We are the ones who are so fragmented in our ways of understanding the world that we can't see these connections. And I think as an educator, my job is to learn and to enable others to also listen and see.
Thank you so much for that. Gosh, there's a lot there, and you've said so much so eloquently as well. I think the point about talking about pluralities and the kind of idea of threads was so beautifully put. And I think and these points about slow is bad and the reconnection with self. That there was a lot there, and I think I really agree with what you have to say about craft in the kind of NGO context. As someone that worked in an NGO doing craft, like this was a kind of something I was so acutely aware of, and it's like and I think this is why listening is to me such an important thing, because you can't do those things without kind of listening in the first instance. I'm conscious of time, so let's go ahead and move on. I have a question for Shahzada that kind of again builds on this and kind of thinks a little bit about it in the kind of bigger kind of manufacturing production process. And I think some of the things you guys have kind of touched on are about care to me, which is this idea of kind of treating these objects and culture with care and kind of the kind of appreciation of it. And so to me, fashion can be quite a traumatic thing. It's something that extracts and it's quite stressful for the environment and for the producers. So Shahzada, I was kind of wondering, in your context as a, working in the manufacturing side, I wondered if you could talk about how you guys are caring for the environment and for the workers in order to kind of address these sorts of traumas that come with fashion.
Yeah. Yes, Kendall. Actually, there are a lot of, misconceptions and a lot of negativity associated with, the manufacturing, the industrialized, the version of the supply chain. So we listen to a lot of all these, negative stories, and whatever positive is happening, or anything which is, being, done for a good cause, it doesn't get noticed that much. So if you talk about care, and if I relate that to the industrial part of my end, we how do we take care about that is it's about our selection of the materials, the choices that we have as a designer. We have this option of choosing the type of materials which have the lowest of the impact on people's life, on land, on the water, and the carbon emissions. So when we talk about environment, we need to think about all these factors of how are we polluting our environment, and what impact it is going to eventually have on you hear a lot of stories of the global warming. So the climate change variants. So how we deal about it is making our choices green in terms of material selections, and the product that we design. We try to design something which is not to be worn or treated as if as a disposable type that you just wear for like 3 or 4 months, or a season and dispose of. We design products that can be used for years as a style statement. And then there come like people, the labor, the man force behind all this manufacturing. What we do is like we provide equal opportunities for women. They get equal chances to excel in their careers. It's not that we discourage them. Even we allow women to take part in all the leading discussions that we have at our factory level. And then we encourage them. How we encourage them? Because if you see the location of our campus, it is in a very remote location. Usually what people do is they build industries and factories on the outskirts of the metropolitan cities. We are based in a remote location, and what vision we had in mind was to care for the people, the society, the people living in those areas where they didn't have any infrastructure. So we wanted to initiate and trigger a cultural change. And when we talk about providing opportunities to people in their doorstep, so we do a projects. For example, we have a project called Ha at our plant, where we teach women and train them on how to actually protect and guard themselves. We give them awareness on how they can avoid certain diseases, and how they can excel in their careers. And we provide equal opportunities for them. And then it's about, we have like specific policies regarding workplace harassments. We train them, and we teach them like what it actually means, because most of the women, they aren't actually aware of it. So we bring their lifestyle, and then that's how we embark the cultural change in them. So that's like giving them a better exposure and chances to excel in their careers. That's how we relate to it.
Thank you very much. I think I agree that the good things often don't get the loudest voice in the conversation. And we do have a kind of responsibility to be talking about those and highlighting those, because talking about learning again, it's like, well, we can never learn from good practice if we're not kind of showcasing it in the first instance. So thank you very much for that. I will ask Clare then. I think kind of thinking about this in a kind of wider global perspective, given the kind of work you've been doing, talking and listening to people through your podcast. I think a lot of countries over the last year have kind of gone into lockdown, or have kind of given people this opportunity to slow down and to potentially reconsider their lives, or actually engage in making themselves. I know certainly in the UK, there's a new trend for knitting, for example. So But I think it's interesting, and I wonder if you think that this process of slowing down and reflecting has actually allowed for kind of any healing in fashion, and whether this has been an opportunity to kind of recover from some of the potentially damaging effects of the system, or has anything changed?
Well, okay, tough question, because I had so many comments that I wanted to make on the amazing points that were raised by the speakers, and I really want to sort of unpack some of that. But you asked me to talk about whether or not I'm optimistic with that question there, Kendall. I do believe in optimism. I don't think we can make change if we don't believe in the fundamental goodness of humanity and people's willingness to step forward and make positive change. But I don't think a bit of knitting in Britain is really going to touch the sides of the extent of exploitation upon which the global fashion ecosystem is built. And while it's very important to, and I absolutely agree, I absolutely agree with Shahzada that we have to talk about the good stuff too, and we can't learn without looking at the good stuff. And we should be careful about just whipping up outrage where it's not required. Let's remember that it is required right now when we look at the fractured and deeply unethical, across so many facets, global fashion industry. I think what happened with COVID is that let's also just remember that there is no black and white answer. It's not either or, is it? It's always nuanced. There's always tensions, and it's very easy to make one case and be emphatic about it. And it's ridiculous because we're talking about what is it? More than $3 trillion global industry that extends its supply chains into countries all over the world. The lowest average wage for garment workers is currently in Ethiopia, but there are poverty wages being paid across India, Bangladesh, across Pakistan, across much of Africa, and actually in the UK. I mean, we saw. Let's not forget that it's a global problem, shall we say? And that's, I was going to say that we saw in the UK Boohoo, which is a UK-based fast fashion brand that is an online success story, in the news in sort of July, August, basically with modern slavery-like conditions revealed in factories in Leicester. Fast forward to December, and they were in the news again, thanks to a Guardian newspaper investigation that had looked into 2 factories in Faisalabad, which basically revealed that workers were working 24-hour shifts to rush through orders and being paid way less than the minimum wage. This is a story of exploitation that often, we can't say always, but most often impacts women, and most often young women, and often young women with children aged between 18 and 24. And these are women who bear the brunt of the unethical system that our global fashion industry is based on. I think you asked me whether or not, had this pandemic allowed us to heal and reconnect and think more. And I wanted to say, I wrote it down, it was so nice. Pausability. Is there possibility in this pause? Thank you, Sudebi, for that lovely phrase. It's beautiful, isn't it? I do think it's given us the chance to pause and to think. However, we need a lot more than to do that. We need systemic change that recognizes that a system that exploits the many to enrich the few is not sustainable in the long term and is not ethical at all. And I think that sounds pretty negative and full on, but I also do think we need to look at the problems head on before we can fix them. And by sort of shying away from it and trying to suggest that, oh, it's not everyone, it's not us, it's okay, it's not good enough, we haven't made enough progress. I would like, though, however, to kind of I don't want to talk too much because I know we haven't got a great deal of time, but I do feel optimistic. I do feel that we're living through a period of great cultural change where we are becoming globally, and not just in the, in inverted commas, developed or rich countries in the global north, but everywhere we're reaching, I think, a more of an understanding of our global connectivity, and that, the idea that everything we do is done to us, and that we must take responsibility for everybody and not just carry on in old systems that no longer serve the greater good. And I see it happening. So yes, I think knitting is potentially a rather lovely example of people saying, I want to take some power back in this. I want to reconnect. And by making your own things or talking with others who make beautiful things and respecting handwork and just reconnecting, that cliched word, but it's such an important one, we can turn this around. And maybe I'll finish by just saying I love this, the way that a philosopher called Charles Eisenstein puts this universal truth. He talks about a new and ancient story and a beautiful world that we, what does he say? I wrote it down. A beautiful world that we know in our hearts is possible. But he talks about interbeing, which is certainly not his invention. It's an indigenous idea and an idea that's in Buddhism and put forward by many thinkers across the globe. But I love how he talks about this idea that we know it already. It's in our hearts. We know it's true. It's an ancient story, but it's also potentially our new story. And I like the idea that we're moving into that phase where we will potentially figure that out so that we can save ourselves. Is that a bit awful? we need to, though, right?
Yeah, we do. I think, you know, again, knitting in Britain is going to be the new thing.
Why not?
I mean, you know, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there, and I think you know, it does kind of. I had so many other questions for everyone. I'm sorry that we only have an hour, because I think yes, there were lots more kind of points that I wanted to hit on that kind of draw out of all of this. I guess that I'll kind of follow on to that then with a kind of last question to everyone that actually kind of, Claire, fits on quite well with what you've just described, which is like, actually what, you know, if we are talking about refashioning and rethinking, you know, what would that look like to you all? We've only got 5 minutes, so maybe Claire, if we start with you, a kind of 1 second, like how do we do what you've just described, I guess?
Well, I'm going to draw out an idea that Shahzada mentioned there about waste, and I've forgotten exactly what you're phrasing, but you were talking about disposability and how we need to fight against that. I think if we really start reframing our idea of value, stop imagining fashion is disposable, then we can really begin to make headway on fixing the system problems that make the current fashion system less than delightful, and move into a world in which we really value these beautiful things that have been made by human hands. And I think that's the key for me.
Thank you. Noorjehan, do you have a kind of closing quick statement that you want to?
Quick statement is basically difficult. I just feel that what we've spoken about, if we just value what we have really and respect what has been with us for so long, and not push this whole thing about fashion is change. And this is the time what I think COVID lesson is like, you know, what Sudebi spoke about pause, that we have said is the word. So pause, reflect, value, and not be pushed into constant change. I think that's what fashion stands for. So my thing is to re-question, rephrase what fashion is all about.
Thank you. Shahzada, do you have a final kind of thought?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to take like 2 minutes of yours, you know, explaining a bit more, you know, what I wanted. You know, it's a shared responsibility. We all, the stakeholders in the supply chain, be it, you know, the agriculture or the manufacturer, it's going to be problematic. So we all need to, you know, realize our responsibilities. For example, if I being in a manufacturer side, I believe that converting towards sustainable, you know, practices and processes, it involves a lot of cost. So if we just keep that all on the manufacturer's shoulder, not all the manufacturers and factories would have that muscle in investing or, you know, paying back for that. So what I feel to date, you know, still a lot of customers, they don't really bother about, you know, the natural disasters we are having. They just want, you know, economical, you know, so-called cheap products at economical rates so they can, make higher margins, higher profits. So, at the consumer end, you guys or we all have to educate a consumer as well. We need to have a global, our next generations and, natural resources. So maybe for that, if we could, support set up of, fundings and grants, the governments need to step in. United Nations maybe need to step in. They need to help out the small manufacturers, the small industries, adopting all these new, sustainable practices, processes, and get rid of all the, the finance, the cost, behind.
And I wanted to also take the opportunity to invite Sudebi to say any kind of final quick statement.
Thank you. I wanted to build upon what Clare and Noorjehan were talking about. I said I like to interweave elements. I'll take the idea of interbeing, and I think the pandemic, in a way, if we really pause and reflect, it has shown us that the concept of interbeing is not a philosophical and esoteric concept. It's a very practical thing. So these days, you keep hearing the word or the phrase self-care. Self-care, I feel, cannot happen if we don't expand or extend the notion of the self. And it's not possible in a finite planet that one thing is not going to affect or impact the other one, right? So understanding that really is very important. And I feel that what's really important is if we constantly question the notion of price and value, I feel that if we question what is the value of something and what's the price of something, and in connection to that, who's paying that price and who's assigning the value, I think most of the questions can be explored, if not answered. Because when I'm getting something for very cheap, somebody is paying for it. I'm not, but somebody else is. Or if not anything, the planet is paying for it, right? So asking that question and what is the real value of something, it can bring fashion to the context that it deserves, the notion of fashion, the temporal context, the structural context, the socio-political, cultural context. So that's my parting thought.
Thank you very much. I think that's all the time we have for today, but I just want to thank you guys all so much for your contributions. It was fantastic to hear all of your perspectives and to actually make this happen and to have, kind of to get us all together in this way has been really amazing. So thank you very much. And it was such a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. It was an honor.